So if you've got a really large tree, and we're talking about 1 hour per sprinkler location. So, you know, I've got a big cedar elm. In fact, you know, I need to take a big picture of this because I bet you most of you have never seen a cedar elm like that in the front of our pasture between the houses. It's got 3 trunks on it, each trunk about like this. And it covers, oh, I don't know, maybe half an acre. It's quite a tree. Well, I was looking at it last week from a distance, and I began to see that top get a little gray. You know, a little heat drought stress on that tree. And, you know, a lot of cedar elms are already showing it. Smaller ones you can see better. So for the last 3 nights, all night, I've put in 3 sprinkler locations. And I can't even get, you know, nearly all the root system watered in 3 sprinkler locations. But I have soaked that tree. By the second night, I could tell the difference in the color on that tree, the top of that tree. So that's soaking under the branch line, regardless of how many sprinkler locations it takes. And remember, we said that in your yard, if you do your test hole, you may find that it takes 2 hours per sprinkler location to get down to all of those tree roots. Yes, sir.
So I got a pretty big willow tree, and when I water it, you know, they're real water trees.
Yeah.
You know, the grass grows hugely. It's probably getting most of that water. I mean, this comes back to the question of getting rid of the grass. I didn't really get your solution for dealing with, you know, I've got plenty of other grass. I don't really care about that grass. But turning it all up doesn't sound like, you know, I mean, what about just putting a tarp down or something, or, you know?
Well, I mean, putting tarp down, you know, intercepts your water too. Yeah. You know, a lot of grasses will die if you cover them with mulch. Not Bermuda grass. Bermuda grass won't die if you cover it with Lake Travis for several years. So, you know, Bermuda grass is a bit of a problem. I meet a lot of people who are doing really good tree care. They got their mulch, they're keeping their trees, you know, just more, you know, not dry. With watering, the goal is it's called keeping a kind of consistent, even moisture in your soil. Not letting it get dry. Just not letting it get dry. That's why I'm beginning to question myself about once a month on our big trees. Because right now, you water once a month, you go back out there in about 2 or 3 weeks, and I mean, there's just no sign of any of that water you put out there. Yes, sir, Jason.
I've heard when watering, you put out like a tuna can. And once that top's off...
Yeah, I'm not much of a tuna can fan. I mean, I know a lot of people do, and a lot of people talk about it. I really like the... You know, you need to know your own soil. That's another thing I like about my little 5-inch test hole. Yeah. Not only do you learn if your watering is working, but you also begin to learn, you know, what your soil is like under your trees. If you dig 3 or 4 holes under your tree, you're going to learn about your soil, and it's really important to learn about your soil. Okay, and so I prefer to talk about tree care guidelines in you know, amount of time, which is what, you know, homeowners relate to, I think, rather than, you know, hoping that, you know, you can move this tuna can around and kind of get a good idea. That works too, of course. I think the other is a little bit more water efficient as well. Yes, ma'am.
If you put in a new system with new little trees, and they have these bubblers, and they have the thing
that,
you know, holds water.
Yeah.
Okay, it's new trees, but as that tree gets bigger and the
great question. Great questions. Right where I needed to be too. Thank you very much. So you see, this is the transition from, you know, your newly planted tree to getting it established to you know, beyond establishment, which is now we're calling, and this is a whole new thing in tree care, and I think it's actually on here. Well, it's called care after planting. What I call it now is called post-establishment maintenance. Things you got to do to a tree after you've even got it going, which we used to didn't even worry about very much. These strangling roots are part of post-establishment maintenance, which we're probably not going to get to today. But, so, you've been watering your new young tree for 3 years, right in the root ball. It starts growing, and it's what we call shoot growth. You all see this little cedar elm here? Oh, for some reason it had some tops cut off of it. That doesn't really matter. This growth right here is what we call shoot growth. When your tree that you planted in the ground starts having shoot growth, that means the roots have penetrated the hole you dug for it. And generally, we say a tree is established when it starts having shoot growth. When a tree starts having shoot growth, you have to change the way you're watering that tree. You're not supposed to put the water at the base anymore, and in fact that's when you start promoting base and root rot diseases by having the base and root crown too wet. Because the roots are now grown out, roots will grow depending on your quality of your soil, let's say a foot to 4 feet a year. Around here, I think it's more like a foot to 2 feet. That's really good soil. As your roots grow away from the trunk, you have got to water where the roots are. And so you no longer can use a bubbler to water your tree that you started. Now what some people do is they change that bubbler head to a head that sprays out away from the trunk. That'll work for a few years until the roots get really out there. And then what you have to do is you have to water them with a sprinkler, just like your big mature trees, or you go to, area sprinklers some people have. Put out a lot of water in a bigger area. So you definitely have to change the way you water a tree as it gets older. It's critical. You're going to really hurt your tree. In fact, what a lot of people do, find it every week, most of the time the bubblers are about covered up by mulch by this time after they've been in there watering the base of the tree 5 or 6 or 10 years. And then that mulch and that bubbler are just, asking for root rot disease. You got to just, get rid of that bubbler. You got to take the saucer away, get rid of that mulch, expose the root crown, and sort of, start on a new regime of taking care of that tree. So starting a tree requires a whole program, and then once the tree is established, you got to get rid of that saucer, make sure that mulch is not covering that root crown, and you got to water in a different place. Yes, ma'am. On a large established tree, and you have a very limited water resources, here's the key. You take about 1/3 of the distance away from the trunk, out to the edge of the branch line, so you got full distance, you take 1/3 of that distance. That distance right there to your drip line, big donut all the way around. That's the most efficient place to water your tree. If you've got a little more tree resources, a little more water resources, you go out beyond the drip line and make that big donut hole. So that's if a tree is... That you don't need to water around the trunk. It's out under the branches that you're watering, further out. So if you got a tree standing alone, a big old tree, you don't really have to worry about the trunk. Get out away from the trunk, water under the branches. And if you got the capability, beyond the branches a little bit. Because if you've got good soil, and you've been, had pretty good moisture, those tree roots are going to be well beyond the branches. And those are the tree roots that are really working. But if you look at Dr. Coder's drawing right here, they're all out under the branches. Watering questions? We're still talking about water.
I found a PVC drip hose that has holes in it every 12 inches. If I make a circle in that 1/3 to 2/3 out from my tree and just water that overnight, is that going to be a good system?
Well, I would think it would be a real good system, but then you take your trowel out there and check that out. That might be more water than you're needing in some cases. But that does bring up a really important point. I'm looking for folks to find some better ways for us to water trees, and if it gets as critical as it could, we're going to be needing those new ideas and efficient ways to water our trees. Let's see, we got a lot of questions. Yes, ma'am.
Is a scissor hose very effective, and how do you deal with it when my house back to Greenbelt, so the backyard slopes somewhat into the house? So when it rains, all the rain sits at the back of my house. It doesn't really necessarily get to the trees, and the trees that I have are like 15 years old, so they're taller than the house. To be able to water those appropriately, I was trying to do a soaker hose to keep the water slower, so it would soak in, so it wouldn't run so much. Would that be a...
Yeah. Well, one thing that really helps in a situation like that is a good mulch bed. Because